Hi, welcome to LiLu Talks, where we explore the transformative power of digital innovation, delve into the nuances of tech leadership through a female lens, emotions, technology, people, inclusivity, and so much more. We are your hosts. I am Lucy, this is Lisa, and we are thrilled to have you with us. Welcome back. We're exploring the crucial conversation on gender and racial bias in AI with the help of our very special guest, Attul Sehgal, who will help shed light on leveraging AI insights to propel digital transformation forward.
Attul is an author, entrepreneur, digital transformation, and product strategist. Among his accomplishments is the founding of Red Zebra Analytics in 2012, where he introduced an innovative cashback loyalty system in Europe. He is recognized for advising C-level executives, shaping digital strategies, and leading transformative initiatives, as well as working with brands like RBS, Microsoft, Deutsche Telekom, and more. Along with a popular digital transformation LinkedIn learning course, reflecting his dedication to empowering non-technical executives in navigating the digital landscape. With that said, welcome, Attul. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Lisa. I'm very happy to join you today. So thank you for the kind invitation. As you were saying, Lisa, my book, Demystifying Digital Transformation, is just out. It came out a few weeks ago. It's published by Springer Nature. Thank you for everyone giving it such good reviews on Amazon. I'm very much appreciative of that. And also, as you mentioned, Lisa, I do have a LinkedIn learning course for people who are really confused about digital transformation, what it all means. And that has been available for any LinkedIn user, and it has around 9,000 followers. So I'm very pleased about that. And also with a nice global following. So hopefully the insights from the book and from my own experience can really help us today to uncover these questions about profiling with AI systems.
I will put a link to your book in the description, as well as a link to the learning course. Highly recommend reading the book and definitely try out. Be ahead of the game. All right, tapping into the topic of gender and racial bias AI, you covered some examples in your book that I want to tap into, Attul, and that is in the United States, the American Civil Liberties Union, also known as ACLU, released a report revealing that Amazon's facial recognition software identified 28 out of the 435 members of Congress as criminals. Additionally, it was found that a disproportionate number of people of color, 39% to be precise, were flagged compared to white individuals, where it was only 5%. Although Amazon argued that ACLU did not use the software at the recommended tolerance level of 95%, but there is no legal requirement to adhere to this threshold. Also worth mentioning that in the UK, The Verge magazine reported police were comfortable in deploying facial recognition technologies, even with a 98% failure rate.
Yeah, I mean, there's some very interesting some figures there, and also some quite shocking about how bias is apparent in these systems that we trust and use by through our governments. I think it was interesting as well that this was in 2018, when you would think probably things were at an earlier stage of development, and so maybe we should be a bit more forgiving about how these systems are being used. But the challenge is that the earliest adopters of these systems were the government institutions. So there's an ethical question there about which systems our governments use that we pay our taxes for, and how they could be used in many ways against us. So that's some of the observations about that. I mean, hopefully today it's 2024 and things are better, but still there's an ethical question there.
Attul, can you give our audience a few examples of what we mean by bias, so that we're just context setting for everyone? So can you just give us a couple of examples when we're talking about bias? What do we mean by that?
Yeah, I think, for example, when Lisa was talking about the identification of members of Congress who were potential criminals, what it was doing was essentially matching their images to data sets that were populated into their algorithms, and then making a match to say, is this person potentially somebody who could either break into your car or cause some offense to you? So who should be singled out? And the challenge is that a lot of these systems, they use data sets, and these data sets are probably images that they probably got without people being even aware that their images were being taken. And those data sets are then put into an algorithm, and then those two things together create some sort of bias, because it could be essentially you've got images of the last, of criminals over the last 10 years, okay? And that data is fed into an algorithm, and then the output of that is creating some opinions about who will commit crimes in the future, which is where bias occurs.
So two interesting points there that I'd just like to jump off. We've kind of quite quickly got onto the doorstep of philosophy here, haven't we? Because, what does a criminal look like? That could be a whole topic in itself. And, we all know that the answer to that is sort of fairly infinite. But the other point that you made, Attul, that I wanted to just pick up on was, those data sets, the training data that the AI is learning from, what it's building the algorithms from, those are provided by humans. And as humans, we come with biases already baked into us. So it stands to reason that the biases are going into the data that the AI is learning from. So what we're actually doing is potentially inflaming situations, or we're creating a tool that might inflame situations of bias, because it's going to take those biases and apply them at scale.
It's not purely only in thinking about criminals. There was a recent article I read in Medium, and one of them was about somebody was using one of the AI tools, generative AI tools, only a few weeks ago, to get an image of a doctor. Now, the image of the doctor that came up, you could probably guess, was a white middle-aged guy wearing glasses, fairly tall, very handsome, and fairly trustworthy.
With a stethoscope.
Yes, with a stethoscope and a white jacket. Now the actual data that's being fed into that algorithm is similar to the data that's being fed into the Amazon recognition system. So, for example, Google, who have their own facial recognition system, they have a data set of 200 million facial images that they feed into some training system that feeds into an algorithm. So what's happening is that when we're using historical data, as you mentioned, Lucy, there are historical biases in that. And what we're doing when we put them into some super clever AI system that we think is cleverer than all of us put together, we're also perpetuating those biases, even if things have changed over time. Our standards have changed over time. Maybe there were, as you mentioned, there were biases in the past. Should those biases be reflected in the future? These are the questions that I believe are not properly being answered. So if you ask me, Attul, is there some regulation in place there? Well, no, there isn't. The regulation is currently being driven by the big data firms. And so can we trust them to self-regulate themselves? That's probably the question that we have to ask. And what's at stake when we're doing that?
This is all part of the journey, though, isn't it? With any new tool. I mean, I know AI isn't new, but I think we've seen an acceleration in it recently, which is why everyone's so interested in it as a discussion point. With any new tool, there's going to be a need for governance and guardrails. And those in themselves will be brand new, because the issues that we're trying to put guardrails around didn't exist until the tool exists. So, for example, before the internet, we didn't need a policy or the right to be forgotten, because the scenario of existing forever on the internet didn't exist. So you couldn't possibly have foreseen that would be a requirement. So I think there's a certain element of learning as we go. But I really do connect with your point there about who is policing the companies that are providing the learning data that's being given to AI.
Any innovator will say, well, the worst thing that you could ever do to innovation is regulate it. That's always like the horror signals that go up. But on the other hand, who is speaking on behalf of society in this? We spoke about these 200 million facial images. Where did they come from? They could be images of us three on this call that someone scanned. Did they get our authority to use them? I mean, where are the guidelines on that? Why can't they, for example, purchase those images? Why can't we sell our images and get some reward for it? But right now, there's a wild west on how data is being used and how it's being used in various AI systems.
ATS systems, hiring, CV screening. And we had a discussion about this a while ago, and it's a topic that it's quite familiar to us, and I'm sure many of you listeners have heard this as well, that ATS systems are gender biased, or at least have been. And you've mentioned a use case with Amazon.
Yeah, ATS is the application tracking system. So if anyone's not aware of it, when you apply for a job or you apply for a particular role and you submit your CV, in the past it would have gone to a human resources administrator who would filter out the CVs to what's applicable to the role. Well, today what happens is that these CVs are in a certain format and they're essentially scanned by something called the application tracking system. So what that means, it speeds up productivity for the human resource department. They can go through many CVs very quickly. And what it does, it identifies keywords that it will then use to shortlist a specific applicant. Now, when it identifies correct words or it identifies a strong candidate, it's once again using a similar system. It takes data from the past. So possibly a company may have had a history of 1,000 of CVs being submitted and knowing that there's a certain number of characteristics that were always successful. So we'll try to use the ATS system to identify those characteristics. And there's an interesting case study, and I must admit, I do salute Amazon for even talking about this, which I also highlight as a case example because it brings the whole ATS system quite clear that they had a heavy recruitment drive from 2015, I think, onwards, and they needed to recruit a lot of people globally. So what they did, they created their own ATS system and they used historic data from the past and fed it into the system. But what they realized when they were doing the ATS system, they were shortlisting candidates who were predominantly male. Any mention of a women's college or any mention of anything female meant those candidates were not selected. But they did pick up on this and they did raise their hand to this. But the question is, has this stopped ATS systems being used? Does it mean that companies are not using them anymore or taking lessons there? Not necessarily so, because regulation, once again, is not very clear on this. And how do you ensure that that old data is used properly, number one, and also has all that old data got the permission from people who may have failed the interview in the past for their data to be used even? These are some of the questions that have to be answered. And once again, it's about old biases. How are they being reflected in today's systems? And it's very unclear for the applicant. So hopefully that gives you some insight into this.
Wasn't there also some data shared which indicated that certain word choices were more frequently used on men's CVs than women's, and those words were being used as keywords? So even without it being something as overt as mentioning a women's college, it was actually a little bit more subtle than that as well. So also filtering out women because they just didn't use those types of words as frequently on their CVs, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating how decisions are made by algorithms or systems that we have no handle of. So it could have even been a father with 3 daughters. And suddenly, because he mentioned he has 3 daughters, I mean, he potentially could be singled out because there was a allusion to women. I don't know, but that's just an example of what could take place with these sorts of, with the way that rules are put into algorithms. But once again, it talks about data. That if you put bad data into any system, you'll get bad data coming out. And who's responsible for that data? Is it the data scientist or is it the business owner? I mean, you would have thought if it's the human resource department would have their library of old rejected CVs, they should be able to look at that and go, yeah, when so and so was here, maybe we were a bit biased, but they don't. They just put all that data. They say, here you go, data science team, sort it all out, thinking that the algorithm will somehow fix those biases, which it doesn't. It can't. Data is data. It just takes it. So there's some real big questions there about how you use technology today and who owns what and how we use it fairly.
What this insight, thanks to AI, reveals about diversity inclusion, which is a topic that a lot of companies do want to take and do take very, very seriously, and others don't. I'm obviously not going to mention particular names, but there are companies that misuse, you could say, diversity and inclusion, that word particularly, just throw it out there. And how inclusive are we and how diversified are we really? Is that just something that a company uses as a facade? We are inclusive, and is this data really showing us, no, we were not actually. There were still certain biases and there were still certain inequalities and in hiring overall, racial inequalities, gender inequalities.
I mean, in terms of these inequalities, though, we also got to take a step back and think, well, if we went back to the old days and there was the human resources person evaluating the CVs, they have their own inherent biases as well. I mean, I remember actually, I mean, when I was doing my A levels, I was told, yeah, don't apply for pharmacy because most of the people doing pharmacy were South Indians or something like that, and they could always tell by the name. So this was actually someone said. Back in the day, though, it was pretty okay to say that.
Yeah.
But when you walk into the room, you've got somebody making some judgment calls. So, but you would think though, with AI, we can make things better. So that question where AI should play a more important role, I don't think it's really being put there. It's just being put there to speed things up.
Which is what it does really well, right? That is one of the huge benefits of AI is faster cognitive processing that would normally have been done by a person. So just to kind of link up what you were saying there, Attul and Lisa, your point a second ago, do we, as I mentioned right at the top of the call, it is a tool. So I think where we're going with this conversation is that we need to understand, I think, or perhaps finesse a little bit how we apply the tool. Do we need to decide which questions, situations, or problems can't just be handed over to AI wholesale? Maybe the bias is too complex to remove because, so Attul, coming back to your point, is all about the data. If all we ever do is use old data as a way to, speed up cognitive processing, what we're going to get is more of the same. And we know that with diversity and inclusion as a destination or certainly a path that everyone should be on, some are doing better than others. What you don't want is more of the same, because that's literally the opposite of diversity. So in using old data as training data and learning data, are we just going to perpetuate the same challenge? In which case, is AI an appropriate tool for that challenge? Do we need to create hybrid situations where we have a human in the loop somewhere or a human checkpoint? Give the cognitive load to the AI, make it process, but then have maybe spot checking done by a person. I think there's definitely space for a hybrid situation. And I do think that part of the challenge is that because we've all got very excited about this new tool and what it can do for us, we're using it for everything without maybe considering whether that's appropriate.
AI-driven tool is actually a very good thing. I think it's how it's being used is where the problem lies.
As with all tools.
From my book, I talk a lot about how the business owner could play a more active role in the success of these tools. I mean, for example, if you want to know about these facial recognition tools, if you ever go to the airport and you're queuing up you'll find that where facial recognition tools are used to scan people boarding onto a plane, those planes get loaded up by about 9 minutes more quickly than they would if someone is checking everyone's passport with their face. So that shows how algorithms are used effectively well. Lucy, I think you hit the nail right on the head when you talked about where does a human step in. So if we look at the old historical data, there should be someone checking, can I use that data? Was there, should that data, should that data have some censorship on it in terms of specific biases? Number one. Number two, should it be myself as, I don't know, as an HR person, should I be working more closely with the data scientists to make sure that there's a flag that comes up with when a woman comes through, so we can get a fair balance in, because that's what we're looking in today's world. So, but right now it does seem to be that we think AI is so complicated and so wonderful, and that we don't, that we all rely too much on what data scientists, data engineers, and data systems are telling us. We've kind of been blinded by the science. Whereas I said to, I think mentioned Lisa before, we become slaves to the algorithm when actually we need to take a much more confident approach. And that can only come by all of us becoming a bit more technical, a bit more understanding, using low code or no code tools to really understand these things so we can ask the real business questions. On reflection, I'm saying basically, I don't think companies purposely are biased, but if they're using systems that could be perpetuating an historical bias, and they're trying to speed things up internally by just getting the shortlist candidates out for the manager, then they'll go for something that helps them in their day-to-day jobs. And divorcing all of that to a computer to manage is a very simple way out. And I'm seeing over time a lot more of this happening in systems where business owners are dumbing down and computers are very much more in the forefront. When you look at generative AI, we spoke about images, about the image of the doctor and all these things. We can even, I remember I sent an image to Lisa early on, the image of if you want to craft a perfect email, you can put something into your chat GPT, but also makes us at the end of the day quite lazy. We actually think it makes us dumber, where non-technical people can play a role in this and make that entry point far easier.
Recent use case that I would like to mention. I don't know if you heard about this. I think it was in Scotland. There was this Willy Wonka immersive experience event that came up recently, and it just really showcases how important it is that we should use AI to support us and not replace us. They were marketing the experience online, and everything was created just by AI. The images, and when people arrived, the entire experience was the exact opposite of what the pictures were. It was literally as if two kids were at someone's home for a sleepover, and they were building these tents. I don't know if you remember when you were a child, we were building tents in the living room in our homes. It was literally just looking like this, just plastering the posters of the prints from the AI generated images onto the wall. Kids were crying. The police got involved. It was a complete disaster.
Yeah, each of the kids got one jelly bean and a quarter of a cup of lemonade, I believe.
Yeah. Don't just dumb down. Use AI to become more efficient, but don't let it replace you. You still have a brain. There's so much more creativity to us humans than there is to AI.
Just again, pulling together those 2 points that you guys both just made. So Attul was talking about, where we insert people into, the processes or the challenge or the problem solving. And the example you just gave, Elisa, so not just handing it over wholesale. It's about right tool for right purpose and appropriateness, but also, Attul, you were talking about, bringing people into that. I follow Florian Akhtar. He's the chief AI officer at Avanade, and he talks about taking a people-first approach to AI, which I think is really interesting because it's a spin that I'm not hearing from many other places. or many other people in the conversation and the narrative about AI. So, Attul, what you were saying there is, where do you use people so that it's effective, or as effective as it can be? So you're using people where it's most appropriate to use people who are trained in how to use the tool of AI, but are not necessarily technical because they don't need to be. And then where is it appropriate to use AI? So you've got those two things working in harmony. You've got the people where they're appropriate. You've got AI where it is appropriate. And I feel like that's where we're trying to get to, but we're not quite there yet. We're still we're still having our shiny moment with the brand new toy that we all want to play with.
What's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is that we're really being flooded by technology, new acronyms, buzzwords. And I think it's very hard for non-technical people to keep up. I think that's the biggest challenge. I mean, we're talking now about generative AI. Next minute, we could be talking about quantum energy, or we could be talking about blockchain and all these things. And it's very hard for a business owner to make clear decisions. And what they tend to do is switch off and just say, this is too technical. To try and satisfy their organizational bosses, they will say, yeah, I'll do a pilot on this and then we'll see how it does. But none of that is really, is really fostering better control of technology from the business end. I think that's a much more fundamental question to answer today, is how do non-technical people become more technically confident? And recently there has been the onset of these low code or no code tools that you can use. I mean, for example, I looked at the Amazon recognition platform, and you can, all of us, anybody who's even listening today, who's just curious about this, can go on to Amazon, look at recognition and play with this recognition tool to see for themselves of how it works. And if they spend half an hour on that, they will know a lot more about how these tools are being used by just being free to play. And there needs to be more of these types of applications like that. So where non-technical people, without any restriction from anyone telling them to do it, just pick it up and try to play with it. And that's where 2024, 2025 needs to be focused on. Really, it's about business, non-technical being much more confident, not listening to the respected Avanade or Accenture person who's the super technical guy telling that, but actually a non-technical person telling them, you can do this. You don't need the permission of your IT department. You could do this and you'll see benefits, and then you can make your own decisions about how this could help you deliver on your business outcomes. Still not taking place because IT departments to me are in too much control of what's going on.
Technical literacy is I think the most important thing moving forward. In previous years, we were able to really ignore some of the technical aspects of our work, but shifting into this new era. But now that it's becoming more commercial for all of us to use, I think becoming technically literate, I think it's hopefully a proper word of saying, and it's quite important. Raise the question, what can we do as leaders or even as employees with the data that we have, with the insight and knowledge that we have? What can we do to improve our work life with the tools that we have without falling to this loophole of being too reliant on it, particularly because we don't have the strong foundations yet. We don't have a fully built proper AI tool. Just take Gemini, for example. We had this issue with Gemini was the exact opposite of bias. It was too inclusive, where it was in fact, where it wasn't even factual at this point, right? So there is this fine line of yes, AI is great. We can write faster emails, but how do we work with this? Collaborating with the new technologies that has been given to us.
Well, I'm going to let Attul answer this one first, because you know what? I don't have a lot of answers. I just have a whole lot more questions.
Yeah, but we shouldn't forget about there's some real positive benefits as well. When we look at facial recognition tools, and we spoke about when you're at the airport and you're trying to get onto a plane, by saving time, computers using these systems does mean that our lives are better. When we talk about the application tracking tools, we have to also bear in mind that it does allow companies to handle 10 times more applications than they could do in the past, which means that we are getting some short face time or interaction with the organization. But we should also, be clever. We should also know, actually, applying for a job is what you call a people business, isn't it? It's about so how you then use that thing to then use the technology to try and track down the person who's promoting the job, and then trying to contact them directly using various technologies is what people need to do to try and get technology to be used to their advantage. Now, but that challenge is like, I was talking to someone recently about LinkedIn, and technology moves so fast. People even today are not so confident in using these types of technologies. We're today on a Zoom call, and there are many people who have never even been on a Zoom call, who have never even set up a Zoom calls. But so these understanding how these quite simple tools work is absolutely imperative. I believe there's still a digital divide where I've just said, oh yeah, I can pick up the phone and track down the person on LinkedIn, his contact details or whatever, and have the confidence to contact him. But there's many people who are completely at the mercy of these application tracking systems. They're completely at the mercy of technology, and they're completely at the mercy of the buzzword AI, which, by the way, is misused in so many situations. So there has to be, I think, and I remember about 15 years ago, the government, I think it was in 2009, was trying to get people to be internet enabled, understand what the World Wide Web is. I think in 2014, we need to take things further and say, what are the top 20 applications that people need to know how to use or be fluent with? How do you use Zoom? What is your etiquette on technology? And that to me is where we need to cover it. When can you WhatsApp somebody? What is the dialogue? How do you connect to somebody without them being offended? This whole dialogue needs to be unleashed.
And there's another podcast right there. So Lisa, put that on our list. We're going to have to get Attul back to talk about digital literacy, I think, because I have so much to say on that, but I know we're almost out of time. So I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things just to hopefully round off. One of the things that I think AI does really well for us, if we're talking about positive use cases and positive examples, is it helps you fail faster. Because you're shortening that cognitive processing time, that person reading through all of those CVs, right? So because you're shortening that time, if that person just isn't finding the right candidate, that might take them weeks to read through 900 CVs, but it's going to take AI, a matter of seconds to review and say, you know what, none of these candidates are appropriate. So helping you fail faster, I think, is something that isn't talked about very much. And I think it's one of the best use cases we have for AI, because there's an awful lot of inefficiency and wastage in terms of human effort in that. So that's one of the things I'm really, really interested in. And then, in terms of what do we do? How do we improve? I'm going to take us right back to philosophy briefly. How do you measure fairness? How do you measure lack of bias? How can you measure something that's not there? And what's the benchmark for enough? When do we say, okay, you know what, this is enough lack of bias, this is enough unbiased, this is fair enough? How do you measure that? I think it's so subjective. So I think it's something that we're just going to need to keep discussing. It's going to differ from company to company. It's going to differ from situation to situation.
None of us are 100% certain of what will happen and where this will go, right? But that's the beauty of discussions, is, as you say, if the philosophy brings out our thought processes, the ideas, what we could possibly do or what could happen, how can we prepare for it. I hope you guys liked our discussion. You were able to take away some inspirations from this conversation, and thank you so much, Attul, for joining us. Thank you so much, Attul. Thank you, Lucy, as well. And stay tuned and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
you.